Hi there, and welcome to the Unleash This podcast presented by Unleash Technologies. I'm Dustin Hickle. I'm the marketing director here at Unleash, and I will be hosting today's episode, which we have titled Migrating Off of Drupal 7. What are the options? Today, our guest is going to be our VP of Engineering, Jay Goldbach. Jay, why don't you just take a little time here, introduce yourself, tell us what you do at Unleashed before we dive into the questions.
Sure. Thanks, Dustin. Pleasure to be here. My name's Jay Goldbach. I'm the VP of Engineering for Unleash Technologies. My job is basically to manage the hosting and development practices here. We have about 15 developers spread out across about 8 time zones, mostly full-time developers in the US, but several key developers offshore. We are mostly an open source shop with PHP development in Drupal, WordPress, and Symfony. And we mostly work with associations, but we also do a good bit of ecommerce and manufacturing work as well. More or less things specialize in community development, group development, and bringing people together. And that's kind of a common theme amongst a lot of our projects here.
Yeah, you preach that often, so it's a familiar refrain for me hearing from you. And I'm glad that you're sharing that with the folks watching here. Well, again, the episode today is about Drupal 7 and the fact that that's going end of life in January of 2025. Some of us in the space know what that means. Some of us don't. And so I'm hoping for kind of the first question here, you can give me a little bit of context, first of all, on what Drupal is, and then share some insights on what it actually means that Drupal 7 is going end of life.
Sure. Basically a CMS or content management system is a way to manage the content and interactions on your website without having to do any programming or sort of get under the hood, so to speak. So it allows basically a non-technical user to go in, publish news, events, content for the website without a lot of, training or administrative burden. And so, there are many different types of CMSs. The ones most people are familiar with are WordPress and Drupal, things like Joomla. And they're basically almost all of them open source PHP-based tools, but there are also, offerings from Microsoft, Adobe as well in the commercial space. Content management systems have been around for over 20 years now in sort of the form that they're in roughly now. In the future, the landscape may change, different software might be necessary. But for now and continuing for the near future, CMSs really are the best way, at least in my opinion, to manage your site and your content and your marketing efforts online. So end of life, what does that mean? It's a little deceiving in the sense that end of life doesn't mean end of function. Like it doesn't mean that the tool is going to suddenly stop working. Really what it means is end of support. So if you are on your Windows or Mac computer and you get a little notice to upgrade your system because there's a security patch or something, and you let that patch run and that thing update your system, that is coming from the support organization within that company. And so when you say end of life, that would mean if it was in relation to your computer, that would mean that your operating system would still work, your programs would still run, but you would not be getting those security updates. Therefore, your computer, your system is going to be more, open to attack vectors, more open to, hijacking, all the things that you've heard in the nightmare stories in terms of ransomware. These are the avenues that are exploited by hackers to compromise a website and to either obtain personal information, or just slow the site down, for instance. And there are performance benefits that you also get with support as well. When they improve something in the background, they add a feature. These are things that also come with support. So needless to say, it's a great idea to make sure that your site, whatever software you're using, whether it's for your website as a CMS or a firewall or your local desktop, keeping up to date with the security patches, keeping up to date with the OS releases is really your best way to ensure against, calamity. And it's not that much different on the web. It's just that we're on 24/7 by 365. So we can't shut the computer off and prevent people from hacking into it. It's got to be running 24 hours a day.
Love it. So it sounds like going end of life, like you said, doesn't mean someone's website is just going to immediately turn off if they're still on Drupal 7, although they do need to be moving off of Drupal 7 to other platforms, right? They need to prioritize that. That's really important, especially from a security standpoint. We're going to share a lot of different potential options as far as moving off of Drupal 7 today. And I think the first one that we've prioritized for a reason, because it seems to make the most sense to us, is moving from Drupal 7 to Drupal 10. So why is that the easiest option? Is it the easiest option, right? Correct me there if I'm wrong. And then what improvements should people expect moving from Drupal 7 to 10, right? Like, tell us why that's easy and why we should do it.
Sure. I wouldn't necessarily say it's easy. It is the most logical. It is also the best long-term option for your organization or your website, given the right set of circumstances. And I think we'll cover those in a bit. So there is no one-size-fit-all, answer here. Really, it's a matter of understanding your business and where you're going and what your needs are. So really, there was a huge shift in the architecture of Drupal between Drupal 7 and Drupal 8. And so, there are a lot of folks who have not upgraded from Drupal 7 to the next major versions. And they're sort of, almost on an island in a sense, that they may feel like they don't want to upgrade, to a higher Drupal version or some other reason. The idea though is that by moving to Drupal 10, which is now the current version of Drupal, and that's also a little bit confusing, moving to Drupal 10 is the best future for your site if you are, going to use Drupal. So, the key improvements really are, what I would say is that under the hood, the caching is better, the security is better. And since it's on a much more professional platform, and that name is Symfony, it has the foundation of Drupal is a lot more secure and in much better hands going forward. The Drupal community has done an awesome job over the past 20 years of maintaining the core code, but they also realized that by not using, a framework like Symfony, they were really limiting the utility of Drupal, and they were duplicating a lot of work and focusing on things that they might not need to worry about by adopting a framework. So that's a huge change in terms of the way that you build themes, the way that the site looks. It's also a huge change in some of the back under the hood things in terms of configuration management. But, to sort of simplify the situation a little bit more, the big improvements really are the admin interface is much better. It's much easier to use. It's much more friendly. The concepts are largely the same between Drupal 7 and 10, but the admin interface is a lot better. And I would also add that, Drupal has kind of listened to its customer base, who has been basically asking them for much more flexibility in the visual layout of pages within the admin screens than they've had previously. So your audience who's familiar with WordPress might use something called Gutenberg or Elementor, which allows you to go in and pretty much create a page where you can put elements wherever you'd like them to be by individual page. And so what Drupal 10 has done is listen to their constituency and build in features that will give you a lot of that similar functionality. And they've also done it in a way that helps to avoid some of the pitfalls of tools like Gutenberg and Elementor, which, while they are excellent at what they do in terms of administering a page and allowing you to change the layout, there's a huge burden and a huge overhead on the end user having to load a lot of extra style sheets and a lot of extra code, which really ends up slowing down the site and creating really, some bottlenecks and performance issues. And so, what Drupal said was, great, we're going to do that, but we need to make sure that when we do that, it's not a negative performance impact on the end user. And of course, for those of you who are interested in search engine optimization, that's a big factor. That's really, one of the primary things that the engines look at is how fast does the site respond? What's the time to first content paint, if you're familiar with the terminology. And so, and under the hood, as I said, configuration management, caching is like light years better. And so the site performs better and requires fewer resources. And so I think that those are the two main categories of improvement. And then one last thing that I would add, which was part of the move from 7 to 8, is that what the community has decided is the process of major updates going from 9 to 10, for instance, should really be mostly about just keeping the software of the previous version up to date. So really, migration from 9 to 10 is much more making sure all of your modules are up to date, making sure you're not using any deprecated functions, and really then upgrading to that next major version is a rather simple exercise and a lot less complicated than what we have gone through in the past. Say, for instance, migrating from 6 to 7, that was a major project. It was almost like a rebuild. And I think that they've largely addressed the concerns that the audiences had about those major updates being so incredibly painful. And that's a very timely improvement because those major update cycles are now much faster than they used to be. They're now on the order of 2 years and 3 years instead of 5 or 6.
Yeah, it's such great insight and such great detail. So I think what I heard you say is if you're on Drupal 8 or 9 and you're going to Drupal 10, that should be potentially easier, right? To use my own verbiage. But if you're on Drupal 7 moving to Drupal 10, that's potentially going to be a slightly larger lift because we're talking about a complete change of the core kind of base framework of Drupal itself to get onto a platform that will be easier to update in the future, that has better features, that's a little more user-friendly based on feedback that Drupal got. So sounds like the time is now, right? If this is if this is going end of life in January 2025, if we are on Drupal 7 and you're trying to go to Drupal 10, maybe sooner than later makes more sense because it may be a larger lift. Would that be accurate?
That's exactly right. I think that this is, again, there are a lot of folks who hesitated upgrading past 7 for whatever reason that they've had, valid reasons, I'm sure. However, there is now a drop dead date, really for the support in January 2025. They pushed that date back a couple of times, understanding that there were a lot of people still on Drupal 7. But the time really is now in two ways. Number one, you want to avoid that end of life situation. And number two, you want to make sure that you're getting this upgrade in the works, that you're budgeting for it, that you're starting to do the preparation that's going to help you do this more efficiently and more cheaply. Start that process now because finding your vendor, getting the project up and rolling, all of these things takes time. And it may seem like January 2025 is a long way from now, but it will go really fast, especially if the process, is not underway for you to be able to sort of respond to the situation. You can technically stay on Drupal 7 as long as you like. It's open source software. You own it. You can do whatever you like to it. However, it really doesn't make sense, and your support costs could go through the roof. But the most important is that your risk increases dramatically. And, nothing's more expensive than getting your site hacked or compromised. That is really way more expensive than having somebody maintain your site for you, both in terms of your reputation and, of course, your hard costs.
Yeah. Seems like maybe you've been there before or helped people get through that before. So that's a whole experience.
None of my sites have ever been hacked before. Are you kidding? Come on.
I'm just saying it sounds like a client or somebody has called you in the past and gone, Jay, please help. That was experience talking.
Right.
What you mentioned before, we've really got into that deeper conversation on Drupal 10. You mentioned WordPress. There is another option, right? I mean, you don't necessarily have to stay on Drupal. And I know that WordPress is probably the next in line if you're looking to move away from Drupal. So maybe explain a little bit about that. Is it easier to stay on Drupal? Is it easier to change? What does that look like? Is WordPress truly an okay option? Help us understand kind of the way that we at Unleashed kind of navigate that conversation with our clients.
Sure. And I think it's an excellent question. And I think it's probably the one on a lot of folks' mind who have hesitated to upgrade is what are their options? WordPress is the one that's going to come to mind first. It is the market leader. There are more installed WordPress, sites than there are by Drupal by far. However, they really have two different purposes. And I think that's really what, we try to get across in our discussions with clients or prospects for that matter, is, the choice should be based on your business, right? That should determine the direction in which you go, not, somebody's familiarity with one piece of software or another. And so, if a business is coming to us with a Drupal 7 site, and really their expectations and their requirements have gotten more modest over the years. Maybe it's really just a marketing site, just has content and information, not a lot of interactivity or other aspects of it going on. It might make sense to move to WordPress because WordPress is designed for a much smaller set of functionality. It was originally started as a blog engine, and that's essentially what it still is many amazing features that have been added on top of it. It still is more or less a single admin system, and sort of a single group function system. In other words, it's a marketing site, it's a blog site, that sort of thing. Now you can build whatever you want in WordPress, like in Drupal. It is open source. However, the hurdles that you have to get over and the risks that are involved with some of these choices, it really makes one more a better choice than the other, let's say. And so, on the other hand, if your site has maintained a level of complexity or has increased over the years, or you really have some things you would like to add, like single sign-on or e-commerce, community features, then you really want to seriously consider moving to Drupal 10. It is a platform that is designed from the very beginning to be very customizable, very open, and very flexible, without actually changing the core code of the site. And that's obviously a huge, issue that we could talk about some other time. But it allows you to basically reach back within the system code and make changes to the results that your user's going to see without changing the core code, without breaking anything. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why Drupal is more complicated. It is, higher level, required in terms of, development and customization. However, that is a feature, not a bug, because what it is allowing you to do is build a much stronger website, a much more robust website, and a website that the initial investment that you're putting in is going to be able to last longer, because there's a lot less churn in the plugin module space for Drupal than there is in WordPress.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, we've talked about this together off of this call, multiple times, but I think where you always kind of go back to, it's exactly what you led this conversation off with is, what's the strategy here? Why are you making a change? Right. What are you trying to accomplish with this website? What are you trying to have it do? And if you answer those questions first, a lot of times the platform that is best for you will kind of reveal itself, right? I mean, to your point before of things being extremely, if there's a lot of complexity on your site, or if your site's doing all kinds of really cool, database searches or queries or search, tons of search facets, that type of thing, Drupal probably is a little bit better. But if it is just more of your front-facing, client-facing, we used to call them brochure sites, then maybe WordPress is a little bit better of a fit there. And so
nothing wrong with it.
Right, absolutely. And so that's one of the things that we try to lead with, right? Here's my little pitch for our services. But like one of the things we try to do is make sure that our clients and our prospects have that conversation, have that strategy conversation with our team, so that we can understand and help them pick the right platform. So there's nothing wrong with WordPress. It's just a slightly different kind of pathway based on the needs, right?
You choose the right tool for the right job. And I think that's one of the reasons why we specialize not just in Drupal, but in PHP, right? Because that gives us the widest range of options we can offer to our clients, in technologies that are readily available and accessible. We're not writing the sites in Go. We're writing the sites in PHP. And it's something that's very accessible. There's millions of developers who know PHP. So, keeping within that WordPress, Symphony, space and Drupal space, makes a lot of sense because we can offer a great deal of expertise and we can help the client to really hone in on where to invest, in their site. What is the value you're looking to get from your site? And then we can help you understand where to invest. What role search engine optimization plays in that? What role content optimization plays in that? What role performance and uptime and availability, play in that? It's a hugely complex world, and no one knows all of it anymore. And so really it makes sense to have a team that you can rely on or be part of your team, really, to help advise you and to help you understand and navigate the landscape. Whether it's UT or somebody else, it's more important than ever that you're making informed decisions because you are sort of charting a course for the next few years for your organization, or you're going to buy something that's very expensive that you're going to have to change quickly. And that's almost worse. So I think that, it makes sense. It's not a difficult or prolonged exercise. It's not even painful. It's really mostly just about getting you to put into words, what it is you are looking for your website to do, just as you would put together your 5-year plan for your business. It really should be treated, the same way.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into other best practices later in the conversation, but that's one that I definitely think we can park on, is making sure you have kind of a strategic plan for sure. Well, let me ask you this question. I've heard you say before, I've heard others on the team say before, even you might have mentioned earlier in this conversation, you could just stick with Drupal 7 if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
You literally could leave it there, but there is another option that potentially gives you a little bit more security versus just leaving your Drupal 7 site out there forever. And what I've heard you guys talk about is Backdrop. So can you explain what Backdrop is and how it works?
Absolutely. And I think it's critical to have all these options on the table to understand, what the pros and cons of these are. Obviously, we don't get through all of that in this conversation, but I think we can hit those top levels. So really what Backdrop is a fork of Drupal 7. And really in software terms, what a fork means is that we're going to take a copy of that software and then we're going to call it our own. And now we're responsible for it forevermore. It's not going to go back to Drupal. It's not going to try to meet up with it somewhere along the lines. It's now an independent entity. And so for organizations who really like Drupal 7 or have a huge amount invested in a Drupal 7 site, either time-wise or money-wise, it really makes sense to choose, or to look at Backdrop because it has the same architecture as Drupal 7 does. It has the same requirements that Drupal 7 does. And while it's not a one-to-one match, the upgrade process from one to the other is a lot easier and a lot more straightforward because you're moving really from like to like. Whereas from 7 to 10, it's apples to oranges in so many ways. Good ways, but different. And so Backdrop has also added, has taken a look at subsequent versions of Drupal 8, 9, and now 10 and said, what is good about those that we can backport, right? We can take from those other versions of Drupal and add into our version of Drupal. And so they've added some really nice features and addressed some issues that had been, bugging Drupal developers and administrators for many years. And so to be honest, I did most of my Drupal work in Drupal 7. So that's a lot of my background and experience. And it was really refreshing. And I'm glad that something like Backdrop exists. Now, is it the right choice for you and your business? It's hard to say from here where I'm sitting, but it is certainly something that you should consider. And then I think, to be, just to be objective here and put it all on the table, the con, of course, what's pros is what's going to happen to Backdrop. So is it a community? Is it a company? Is it going to go public? Is it going to be acquired by Acquia? Is it going to remain a strong and independent organization as they've committed to? It can't tell the future. However, I think what you're basically doing is you're saying, we're going to jump outside of the whole Drupal 7 end of life situation and we're going to jump outside of, major Drupal versions every few years. And we're just going to put all of our chips on sort of Drupal 7 being, what the solution is for our organization. And there's nothing wrong with that if it works for you.
Yeah. So, inherently it sounds like there's some risks, right? We don't know what Backdrop's future plans are. They've made some commitments and some public statements, but you never know, right? But the pros are, if you've invested a lot of time, effort, energy, money into a Drupal 7 system that's doing really good work for you and it's still firing on all cylinders and working well, that's something to explore, right? It's an option to explore. Okay, so are there other options? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, we've done, these types of cross grades is basically what you would call them, is you're sort of hopping from one lane to the other, but really the version is sort of the same. We've done a few of these, and I think that the idea from the client standpoint is that they are at a transition point where they don't know if they're going to commit to Drupal long term, right? And so, instead of their normal inclination would be, let's go along the track of Drupal, follow their, their map, their software map. But they may be saying, we're not sure, maybe there's, a change in the business in the future or a change of leadership. So, we're not really sure. We need to sort of park for a little while or tread water for a little while to buy time to make that decision or have that event take place. And so Backdrop really is, a valid alternative just for that reason, to be able to have a piece of supported software that's going to get those updates, but not have to commit whatever your budget would be, to go to 10 or to go to WordPress or to go to whatever.
That makes sense. So those clearly aren't the only options, right? We've talked about Drupal 10, we've talked about WordPress, we talked about Backdrop. Clearly, there are other options. We've talked again ahead of this conversation. Maybe these aren't always the best options, not always the most recommended options. But again, it boils down to what the business needs individually. So maybe share some of those other options that are available, just so that we are kind of sharing like you said, everything on the table, right? What are one of the other options?
Yeah, and there are always options. First of all, you could build your own content management system if you really wanted to. Wouldn't recommend it, having built a few myself back in the day. But really, seriously speaking, the alternatives to these sort of, tried and true software packages and CMSs is really to kind of have a more distributed approach to your site. Long ago, it was super important that every page in your site, every function that it performed had the brand on it, it had the menu on it, it had everything looked like it was all under one roof, and that was super important. It's not necessarily as important to people anymore. They're used to going from Etsy to PayPal and back to Etsy again, and things like that. So, really, if, let's say, for instance, you're a small vendor and you're just selling t-shirts at the marketplace or on Etsy, you don't necessarily need a huge presence, and most of what you're looking for online is going to be performed by this provider, by Etsy or by PayPal or by somebody else, right? So instead of having your store built into your Drupal site, what you could do is have a smaller site and have your store built in Shopify, or a tool like that. So what you're doing is sort of doing that best of breed decision-making process where you're looking for sort of tools that work for you and your business, and maybe even tools you're already using, as the cornerstone of what you're going to build out front. So, for instance, nowadays, almost overwhelmingly, where clients are starting to think about their site is their CRM, their customer relationship management software. So whether that's Salesforce or one of the other thousands of options out there, their business now relies so heavily on their CRM, and it's such a core part of their business that having their website be an extension of that CRM is what makes the most sense. And so, maybe it's that you have bits and pieces of information on your site, and they click over to log into a Salesforce portal that you've created for them to enter, information. Alternatively, not to plug Drupal again, but there are all sorts of APIs and connections we've built to things like Salesforce and CRMs in Drupal. So, obviously it's possible there and with WordPress as well. But the idea with that sort of distributed approach is that, you're sort of picking and choosing what elements you require. And a lot of those elements, if not all of them, are going to be managed by other people, right? So now Etsy's responsible for uptime. Shopify is responsible for uptime and updating their security policies. Really, you're responsible for publishing the content and updating your catalog.
Yeah, I love it. And we've had, some folks work with us on various, distributed technologies like that, or headless applications, things like that. Again, what makes the most sense for what you're trying to accomplish. And I love that you brought up the fact that consumers today, depending on what you're selling, are very comfortable, right? Making a purchase somewhere, realizing they've been redirected to PayPal, paying with, Apple Pay or whatever on PayPal, and then zooming back over to you paying with I always say paying with your face,
Right.
It's kind of weird, right?
Your money maker.
Right. There you go. It's your money giver at that point.
Right.
But at that point, like, people are used to that. It doesn't scare them anymore. You don't have to be in one secure, safe little box location under the site. So if it makes sense, distributed technology could be the play.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, remember at one point in time, people were deathly afraid of using their credit cards on the internet, right? Things have changed. They evolve over time. And so, that partner, that team that you have, consulting with you and advising you on these things, that's how you keep up with these trends and how you take advantage of them for your business purposes. But something you mentioned that I think I skipped, which was headless, I should just probably hit real quick because it might be a term that folks have heard before that they might, want to put some info to. And basically really what headless means is that you've separated the presentation of your website, right? What people see and how they interact with it from the back end of your website, the database, the logic that determines who sees what, that sort of thing. So what you're doing is you have two separate pieces of software in essence that are doing the same thing that one CMS would have done for you previously. Now it gets convoluted when you start talking about headless Drupal or headless WordPress. Don't really need to go too deeply into that except to say that it's a way you can separate those two things. And usually that's beneficial to businesses that have very specific and very detailed, user experience requirements. So what I would say is like maybe a perfume company or a fashion company or a music producer, who wants, all kinds of animations and wants all kinds of non-standard interactions, on their site, or wants to be able to have their entire site on their homepage or something of that nature. Those are usually good candidates for, a headless front end. Normally speaking, there's going to be not much need for that, and it's going to add a measure of complexity that's probably going to, increase the price without really increasing the value. But again, your mileage may vary.
Right. Well, and it makes some sense too. Like I've been on the marketing side of things my entire career, and so if your brand relies on flash or flare or something that makes you stand out or makes you look really unique, or like you said, perfume company is a great example. If you've seen a TV commercial, which or anything like that about a perfume ad, it's they're always a little bizarre, they're always a little quirky, they're always a little different, they're always making some sort of statement. And so there could be an application for a headless front end, something that's a little quirky, a little different for a company like that. Okay, well, I'm going to shift gears really hard on you.
Sure.
And this is coming. I told you ahead of time, this is coming. Sure. This is a question we ask everybody who comes on our podcast because it's a topic that's very important to us here at Unleashed. So the question very, very just directly is, how does technology like this, these Drupal upgrades, these WordPress systems, these CMSs, especially Drupal, since that's kind of our sweet spot, how does technology like this help underserved populations overall? What is this doing to make people's lives a little bit better?
Sure. I think there's a couple of different answers to the question. What the first one I would lead with is basically that Drupal was built as a community, sort of generating piece of software. Just because it was for the inventor and his college friends to work with, now it's expanded to the White House uses it. Many other organizations use it to build a community online, to enhance, communication back and forth, to be able to control that communication back and forth. You know, for instance, with an association, you know, you want this type of member to be able to vote, but not to be able to run for the office, or some other combination of logic. Well, you know, that's one of the things that a content management system like Drupal or others can, you know, help you out with, so that you are not, it's easing the burden of maintaining that community. I think the other thing to look at with the technologies that we use is that they're all open source. You know, we rely very heavily on the open source community. We contribute to the open source community, and we're part of it. We believe in it, obviously. And really what that does in terms of, you know, barriers to entry is it's $0. So, you know, my first experiences learning Drupal were downloading it and playing around with it, you know, and getting it to work. And it cost me absolutely nothing. Cost me nothing to learn PHP. There are free videos out there. It is, to me, I think, you know, a great career path given the sort of virtual nature of employment now, because you could be building websites, you could be building AI, you know, you could be building any number of different things in your office at home or in your living room on your laptop. And so, you know, it presents a lot of opportunities. I get asked questions when people find out what I do. You know, I get a lot of questions of how do I get into that industry? You know, how do I become a programmer or a developer? And I guess that the short answer is you start programming. You know, you pick up a tool, and like all the rest of us, you think of an idea that you want to make happen, and then you learn the programming necessary to do that. You know, so for me, it was creating a form where I could capture, you know, user information in the late 90s. And, you know, so I had to learn Perl to do that. And so I learned Perl, you know, a little bit, didn't learn a ton, but that sort of gets you into the flow. And then as you get up to a level of competency, you can then look around and say, well, you know, I'm pretty good at PHP. I could have a job doing this, or I could, you know, get certified in something like Symfony, which is a framework built on PHP, and make even more money. Or I could go a completely different direction and learn Java. So I think the idea is that programming largely conceptually is the same regardless of the language. So getting into the industry, that barrier to entry is really low. And then I guess the third thing I would say as sort of a practical application of it is that it's enabling these communities across the world, not just locally. And so everyone's used to communicating over the internet now. Even people in countries that don't have any electrical infrastructure, a lot of them now have cell phone towers running on generators. So people are able to access the internet, but they don't know what's happening 2 miles away from them, and they don't have like running water. The web is everywhere, right? And so, you know, part of being able to support that is having a tool, a CMS, that will allow you to modify the interface on the fly so that someone who's looking at this site, you know, on their cell phone, you know, in Kosovo, has the ability to see the site as you want them to see it and interact with it on their particular device in their circumstance, low bandwidth, etc. And you're not, you know, forcing people to go to a kiosk or somewhere else or a library to find a real computer to interact with you. So again, the barriers to entry go down as the software develops, as the industry develops. And I think, you know, the last thing I would say is that, you know, giving back to that open source community, I think is also a really important thing. You know, I've made a great career out of working on open source software almost exclusively. And I think it's, you know, it's incumbent upon more senior developers, even more junior developers, to reach out, find somebody to mentor, find somebody that you can, you know, engage with, that can teach you, find somebody you can teach, because the old ways are still the best ways. Talking to somebody who knows programming is going to get you a lot further, a lot faster than reading something about computing or watching a YouTube video. That interactivity is very important in that regard. So I'll kind of stop there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's
where you wanted me to go, but there is a lot. There's a lot of tendrils there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we got 3 really good things out of it, and it's so fascinating because, I mean, you even told me, you know, like you said, even here, you know, getting your start, you know, in this industry, the barrier was maybe a little higher than it is with the existing software. And so, one of the beautiful things about this type of technology and potentially helping underserved populations is if there's someone who wants to get into this, you can get into it. It's there. You can build a business, you can build a career, you can grow, and you can make as much money as you're willing to work for out there. There's always development work to do. It seems like, there's no shortage. And so, if that's a pathway to kind of a vision that you might have for your future, we love supporting that type of technology because it actually makes a difference.
Yeah, and there's sort of ancillary aspects of this too. So in other words, you might not want to be a programmer or a developer. You might want to get a job in an office. You might want to get that sort of corporate job. Well, showing the ability to build some things or to develop something that increases productivity or reduces time or helps out support. These are things that business leaders look at as initiative. And they tend to give some weight to people who come in who have done something, as opposed to just talking about it or learning it in school. There's nothing wrong with talking about it or learning about it in school, but the practical application of it is what development is about. And the practical application of it is almost never like what you learn in school, we read in a book. I mean, it is an adventure. And the one last thing I guess I would say is that the software world has become so complex because it moves so quickly that there are so many more opportunities now for expertise in a particular field. So before, really, you kind of had to know how servers work, you had to know how to code, you had to know CSS, JavaScript to get a job building a website. Now, things are so specialized. There are people who just do JavaScript. That's it. That's all they do.
Sure. You use the word practical, and we've talked through a lot of potential options. All of them big macro level. Like we're talking about moving from one platform to another. But there are definitely some things that companies can do now ahead of time to prepare for moving off of Drupal 7. Whether they're going to Drupal 10, which again, we probably prioritize that as the best option, whether they're moving to WordPress, whether they're moving to Backdrop, or whether they're going to some sort of kind of piecemeal method. What are some of the things that companies looking to get off of Drupal 7 before the end of life, what can they do so that their project is as seamless as possible?
This is a great question. And I also think it's a way that organizations can save money in the process as well and get more out of it. So the first thing goes back to what we've talked about previously, which is, understand what the value is of your website. What do you want it to do? What does it represent to your company? And if you're doing that and what you decide follows that, then I think you're going to have a much higher likelihood of success. I think when projects go wrong is that when you start out with a set of business requirements and then that drifts over time and it ends up becoming what I would call a vanity project. That it becomes too entangled with a single person's view of something or a design issue or an interactivity issue, and too much time, energy, and money is spent on something that really isn't adding value to the site or really helping your constituency. So having that list of business reasons, for having your site, having that list of what you want to get out of it and what you can afford to put in it as you go through this process is going to make that so much easier. Imagine it like it's car shopping. You don't just walk on the lot, say, I want the purple one. You do your homework. You understand how, dealerships work. For instance, you understand how cars work, that sort of thing. It's hugely important. I think the second thing I would emphasize is clean up your site. So to the extent that you can clean up content, get rid of what you don't need anymore, deactivate users that aren't using the system, anything you can do to kind of reduce the overall number of elements that you need to migrate is obviously going to save some time and money. And again, if that follows from the first step, which is, business requirements, then you're going to have a good guide, right? You're going to have some guardrails you can put onto that particular, exercise. And then, of course, a lot of it's going to be, understanding what you like and what you want visually, and from an interactive standpoint. and from a legal standpoint or standard standpoint. For instance, if you're an organization that receives money from the federal government in the US, your site must meet certain accessibility requirements by law. And there really aren't exceptions to that. And the interesting thing about that law is that when, if the organization, let's say was a university, and the university system in California had to pay a lot of money for this a few years back, the university or the organization has to pay the fine, not the developer, right? So it's not your consultant or your developer firm that you're using, your agency, that pays that bill, it's you. Mm-hmm. So, understanding that you may have that requirement and putting that in up front when you issue your RFP or you talk with an agency about your particular, slate of work, that's super important to know, because we want to bake that into the process from the beginning. And for instance, if you have, an audience who might be colorblind or have issues with hearing or motion, they're motion sensitive, these are things that make a lot of sense to put into the process at the beginning, not when you're about to launch or after your corporate counsel sees it the day before it goes live. It's a little late at that point. It's going to be very expensive to fix.
Yeah.
So knowing those things up front really is good.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think another thing that you and I have talked about previously is, maybe consider this as an opportunity to redesign your site. Yes. Decide how much you want to invest. If you're going to migrate anyway, perhaps it's time to think about adding new branding or adding new styling. That's another thing that you could be thinking about here. Is that what, ask yourself that question. Is that what we're doing? Are we completely redesigning this, or are we just shifting it? And you always, or you said to me previously, find some examples. If you're going to rebrand or you're going to find a new design, bring some examples to the table for us, right? And I know I probably just stole your thunder there. I apologize for that.
No, it's okay.
But I think that's one of the things that you tend to recommend.
Absolutely. My thinking, my experience in that type of situation is people don't really know what they like until they see it. You can talk to your blue in face. You can get people to sign contracts, get them to read it and acknowledge everything about it. But until folks see it, they don't really know how they feel about it. They don't really know how it fits within their goals and what they're trying to do. So having examples of sites that work for you, especially if they're in your particular industry, really helps us to make better recommendations more quickly, right? So you get the theme here is that what you're trying to do is do a little bit of our work so that you don't have to pay us to do it, that your project can go more quickly, your project can be more successful and more efficient because you've done your own work. The old saying, an educated consumer is our best customer, that is actually true. I think a lot of people feel like, oh, it's, job security for you if somebody comes in and doesn't know what they're doing. Well, it's important to us that our clients are happy, and they're not going to be happy if that's how they go into the process and how they go through it. It's not going to end well. And there's just not enough time and enough money for that to really be the way I would recommend anyone to go. It's important to have some research and have some examples and be able to answer questions like, what level of analytics do you need? Do you need to know where people come from, what their country of origin is, or do you just want to know that they looked at the page? Right. And it seems like an awful lot. It seems like a bewildering list of questions to answer. We can help you with all of that, but it's not as important to tick off everything that I've said as it is to just sit down and think about your site and what it is you're trying to achieve with it. I mean, we can help you with the rest, but I think that's super important to be able to have an exchange and have a discussion with your agency that you're using. Moving on from Drupal 7, regardless of what you choose, is a major effort. Don't underestimate the fact that it's a major effort. No matter what you do, other than just turning it off, everything's going to be an effort. So if that's true, then maybe this is the time to rethink your strategy on your website. Maybe this is time to rethink who's doing the website work for you. This is an inflection point for you and your website, in other words. Take advantage of it because, you will be doing the most efficient, benefit to your business.
Love it. And I would consider those probably like fantastic closing thoughts, but I want to give you the platform. If you have anything else that you want to close on, if you can do better than that, please do, because that's exactly what we want to be able to share with folks who watch this podcast here. So any closing thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think that, what I would really share, I guess maybe this is too much like a plug for, for UT, but what we've tried to do in the Drupal 7 world, and what the position that we're taking is that we want to be a safe haven, right? We want to be a destination where we can help you with any of those options that you choose. And that, we're not going to force you to use one of them. We're going to, do our best to listen and understand your needs and then make the recommendation for technology based on those, not on what we're comfortable with, not on what we can build the most cheaply. And I think that's something that you should be asking, your potential partner or an agency that you're working with is, are you familiar with these other technologies? Could you build it in WordPress for me if that's what I wanted? And I think that, you will start to uncover, whether this agency or this person you're talking to is going to be a good fit for you long-term, right? Because things change quickly. And if you have a large stable of expertise with your firm that you're working with, then you can roll with those punches.
Love it. And educated consumer is our best customer, right? You said it once, we'll say it again. Jay, thanks so much for taking time here today, sharing your knowledge, answering all these questions for us. For those of you who are watching, if you have more questions, please reach out to us, unleash-technologies.com. Find us on LinkedIn, connect with Jay on LinkedIn, connect with myself on LinkedIn. We'd love to answer your questions and be a resource for you. That's the purpose of this podcast here. Hey, thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep that technology unleashed.